All right, welcome again, Life Point Crossing. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here to witness those two little children hugging each other. I feel like nothing that I say from here is going to be able to matter. This is all we'll remember, but that's okay, because that was a beautiful moment. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Welcome to Stand Alone. It's kind of weird that we're all here together, and it's Stand Alone. But we're still going to call it Stand Alone, because I don't know if this is human nature or if it's just the world and society that I've lived in, because this is really the only world and society that I've lived in. But there is something in all of us, isn't there, that just loves that super romantic ideal of the person who, against all pressure and popularity, stands on what they know is real and true and right. They're true to themselves. They speak truth to power, whatever that phrase means. Half the time I don't know, but we sure love it. This is something that we all love, right? You're not going to compromise who you are. You're not going to back down, even if it's super unpopular. You see this in like the political ads, right? Like, you should vote for this person because they took an unpopular stance, unlike the other person who just shifted with public opinion, which I think is hilarious and ironic, because if taking an unpopular position is really so popular, it's not really unpopular anymore, is it? And by definition, in a society that chooses its leaders by majority vote, the person who takes the unpopular stance, they're never going to get elected. Like, there's just no way. It just doesn't work. And so I think it's really kind of hilarious and kind of ironic, but we all, even if we don't like the reality, and most of the time we don't, right? The person who took the unpopular position, you didn't like them, you didn't vote for them, you were shouting them down and saying they need to change their position because it was different from yours. But we all, even if we don't like the reality, we love the idea of standing alone. Here are some fun lyrics from, probably few to none of us know this, but a somewhat prominent metal band that say, "I go my own way. I swim against the stream forever." And this doesn't even make sense. I will fight the powers that be. Are they suggesting that they're fully aware that they're fighting against the powers that be? That's never going to be effective at all, but they're going to keep doing it anyway just because they're antagonistic? I mean, they call themselves archenemy. Maybe that's their thing. I don't know. But what if they fight against the powers that be, but they're successful, and then the powers that be are better? They're still going to fight against them forever? I don't even know. It doesn't really make sense. I don't think that's very well thought through. But then you come to the money line. The eagle flies alone. And past the very obvious that the person from whom these words come has the other four band members behind them playing the song right together, it turns out that this is really very, very popular. This whole idea of being unpopular and doing the thing all by yourself, everybody seems to kind of love it. On the official YouTube video for this song, right? There's a whole bunch of unofficial ones that have 10,000 views or whatever. The official YouTube video for this song has over 100 million views. On Spotify, it has more than 25 million listens. That's not even counting album sales or whatever. They've really tapped into a wildly popular vein with the idea of doing whatever it is, even if it's unpopular. And you're not even sure, if you look at the rest of the lyrics, what stream they're swimming against. It's mostly just very vague, generalized, like fight against the lies, which everybody's for fighting against the lies. Like, as a church, we're for fighting against the lies. Of course, everybody is. Like, they're only the one sort of specific line is they have a line that says, "I don't believe in heaven or hell." That turns out to be a tremendously standard position in metal, right? And then this is, I just think, kind of funny. Here is a still from a YouTube video. This is of this exact band playing this exact song at a festival, I believe, in Germany. And I look at that. I don't see a lot of standing alone. It looks like a lot of support to me. And I think it's amazing. Like, they're all there, everybody, at least for the chorus, they all know the words, they're all singing along, they're like, "Yeah, I don't listen to what nobody says, like archenemy, like, yeah, me too, the eagle flies alone." I don't think you're really that alone. The person who's really alone, I don't know. We've never heard of them. Their video has 2 views, one of them was a mistake. We have no idea. It's not quite the same, but probably an equally small percentage of us will care. But if If any of you are NBA fans, maybe a couple of us, in 2021, this guy became an absolute hero. It was the year that the Milwaukee Bucks beat the Phoenix Suns in the NBA Finals, and as Giannis Antetokounmpo became a complete folk hero to so many people, and here's why, is because he had opportunities to leave Milwaukee and join more prominent teams with more talented rosters. And a lot of times, very prominent players will do that. And then when they do that, even when they win, a lot of people not impressed at all. But everybody was impressed with him because he did it the hard way. And most people don't want to do things the hard way. You know why? Because it's hard. But he did it, and when somebody does something the hard way, then everybody loves that, right? You're way more impressed when someone climbs Mount Everest or K2 without supplemental oxygen, because it's harder. No one cares if you beat the video game on the easy level. That's not impressive. And so there are some pieces and some elements of following Jesus. It's not everything. But there are some pieces where it kind of feels like we're doing things the hard way. There are some paths of following Jesus where it kind of feels like it's not exactly your own path because it's Jesus' path, but it might feel like you're kind of all by yourself and that what you're doing is very unpopular and not in the super popular sense. And so some of these things are what this series is going to be about. And just as we get started, if you've been here a while, you know, but if you're newer and you're thinking, okay, good, now finally they're going to talk about the thing that other people do that I'm super mad about. I don't know, maybe. I don't know what you're mad about, but I do just hear me say this, that my goal here is never to talk about how bad the people who aren't here are. My goal is always to talk to us and about things that are real and relevant in our lives. And so whether it's controversial or not controversial isn't really like the filter we run through. It's more of what that is. So maybe some things will be controversial, maybe they won't, I don't know. But I do know that for sure today, what we're going to talk about is not controversial. Because today we are going to talk about telling the truth even when it costs you something. Now, that's not controversial at all. Everybody believes in telling the truth. At least everybody believes in other people telling the truth. I worked for a year at a hospital pharmacy as a pharmacy tech, and there was a day I was in the break room, and there was a young pharmacist in there with me. I think she was actually younger than I was, and there was just some random magazine sitting on the table, and so I was reading some article where the author, who apparently lived in New York City, talked about how she found herself just randomly lying about where she lived, what part of the city or what building she lived in, like just basically strangers, her hairdresser, whatever. And so I thought this was fairly novel, and so I made some mention of it. And the pharmacist's response was, well, I just don't understand why somebody would do that. Well, I didn't know what to say. I thought that part was obvious. Right? Like, of course, like just lying randomly for no particular gain. Like, who's ever heard of such a thing? Nobody. Everybody thinks you should tell the truth about your favorite ice cream. Nobody thinks you should lie about where you live or your high school football career or what you had for breakfast. But there can be some times when they're really fudging the truth a little bit. It's just kind of the thing to do, right? And so I hope I don't even really have to justify this biblically, but we do always want to be grounded in the Bible. So here is Proverbs 22. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. I have a fairly vivid memory. I don't know why, but I think I was probably late elementary school age, and my family was visiting my grandparents in California, and my grandfather was talking about he'd recently purchased a vehicle, and he bought it from a private seller, not a dealership, and when they were completing the transaction, the seller offered to write up the little bill of sale for less than the actual price that he was paying so that he would have to pay less taxes on it. And my grandfather telling him, no, that's okay. Write up for what it actually is. I'll pay what I'm supposed to. And it's amazing how quickly our shared value, right? Everybody should tell the truth. It's amazing how quickly that comes into conflict, just a very moderate conflict with saving a few dollars on taxes. And then this person just assumed that my grandfather, like most people, would be very, very happy to sell his value on truthfulness for saving however many dollars it would have been to the state of California. And it's probably very, very easy to justify because no matter who you are or where you live, for sure there are at least some things that your state does that you don't agree with or you don't think they do very efficiently. And there was the time that they had that project that went over budget and they had to put in that extra tax that was never supposed to be there in the first place, and there's nothing you can do about it. So really, you're just kind of leveling things off anyway. This is actually justice. You're kind of Robin Hood. Well, I had to have my dad, of course, explain how this went with the taxes and how that all worked because I didn't have any understanding at that age. But it obviously left a mark on me, right? I still remember this, and I'm still talking about this now, that my grandfather, who, by the way, did not have money, he and my grandmother were missionaries and not hedge fund managers. But he held really a higher value on truthfulness than he did keeping some of his money. There was a different job that I remember that I worked when I was in seminary and a little bit after in a warehouse. And I remember a different time in a break room where a woman was talking about how she'd been, I think she was a passenger in the vehicle. She had a phone call. I think it was probably one of her teenage kids. And she got mad at the end of the phone call. She threw her phone into the dashboard. It flew up, hit the windshield, and cracked it. And then she laughed and she's like, yeah, the insurance company, though, is a big old rock flew up and hit that. Oh, yeah, it was a big old rock. And this is really hard because I was there part-time for a time. This was her full-time job. She and her husband are trying to raise a couple kids. It was not a high-paying job. This is going to be really, really difficult now if you all of a sudden have to pay for a windshield that you weren't expecting. This is really going to cost you something. Proverbs 11 says, honesty guides good people. Dishonesty destroys treacherous people. And I'm certain that she would not have seen herself as a treacherous person. She would have seen herself as someone who needed to figure out a way to get a new windshield, and I guess this is going to be the way. And besides, again, super easy to justify because her insurance, they take her money every month, and no questions asked. Isn't it just right that she sees some benefit on that from time to time? And besides, probably wouldn't anybody else in that break room have done the exact same thing? Well, maybe they would have. I mean, it's really easy to get some sympathy for a situation like that, if it's sympathy that you're after. But if the real admiration, though, isn't that reserved for the person who actually does the right thing, even when it is going to cost you something? If you want understanding, I mean, we could all have understanding for someone in a difficult situation like that. We've probably all had to pay for something that we weren't expecting to and maybe really would struggle to. It's really difficult, but it's easy to just blend into the crowd and do whatever anybody else would do. That's not the standard that following Jesus calls us to. What we're called to is to do the right thing when it's easy, right? Which probably we all do because it's easy. But also when it's difficult and when it costs us something. And that can be difficult. That can cost us something. It's kind of amazing. I usually put these messages and series together a little bit in advance. It works out better that way, I'm certain, for you. And when I was putting this together, there were 3 completely separate, unrelated conversations that I had, or at least was a part of, with different people from different industries talking about how frustrating it was, the level of dishonesty that they see in their, whatever their industry was. One of them was a professional roofer who looked at something and determined there was no real issue and then said, man, you wouldn't believe how many people would tell someone they need a whole new roof over this. Then there was a mechanic who was just talking about, it is just frustrating, the things that he saw where you'd be working, someone would be working on something and they'd break something else, and then they'd just cover for their own mistakes by saying, oh yeah, you know what, we found another problem and now you're going to have to pay for this too. The third was healthcare, which was a little different. It maybe wasn't exactly completely lies. It could be justified, but it had to do with using particular billing codes that maybe could be technically applied, but would be absolutely shocking and horrifying to literally every one of us and every patient if they knew and understood what was counting and what was being charged and billed as what. And some of these may even be more or less industry standards, But it's not the industry standard that Jesus calls us to. It's not just to do what everybody else does. It's to do what's right and what is legitimately truthful, regardless of what anybody else does. I really kind of hesitated to mention this, but as I hope is obvious, as pro-church and certainly as pro-ministry as anyone could be, but I've seen and actually been encouraged in different places to participate in some things, even in church, that were not exactly honest. And it's really difficult because they're legitimately with your best interests in mind, and not yours. These aren't from here, not from Life Point, different places in the past. But it goes something like this. You're putting on some sort of like a conference or an event, and of course the reason you do it is because you know and you believe that the people who come are going to benefit from it. They're going to be glad that they were a part of it. This is why you're doing ministry, after all. But it's really frustrating sometimes because nobody ever pre-registers. Do you ever pre-register for anything? It's certainly not for a church thing. Of course not. No. And so it's really difficult to plan, for one. And then also, that there are people who, if they don't register right now, then they're going to end up forgetting, you're getting busy, and they're not going to go to the event, and they're really going to benefit from the event. They're going to be glad they were there. And so here's what you do, is you say, listen, spots are filling up. There are only 6 slots left. Register today. Does that sound pretty familiar? Not even just like 100 different things, right? And it might even be on some level technically true. Maybe there are 6 spots in the hotel rooms left from what they've reserved right now. But you say this with the full knowledge and, in fact, expectation that those are going to fill up, and then you're just going to get more. Like, nobody's going to get turned away. But if you don't do something to help motivate people to register now, then they're not going to come. There's not going to be any ministry. But that's really not honest. Maybe the single most justifiable way that we fail in this is when we do tell the truth, but we're just a little bit selective about the truth that we tell. And you know what? If it leaves somebody thinking something that isn't exactly accurate, or if someone makes some sort of assumptions, based on what I did or didn't say, but that was their assumption, so that's going to be on them. If you ever hear yourself thinking that, that's a pretty bad sign. You know why in court you have to swear to tell the whole truth? It's because if you don't, you're not really telling the truth, even if everything you say is technically true. I'm sorry I was late. My kids have been making everything crazy. Probably true. Maybe also completely unrelated. Maybe the reason you were late had nothing to do with your kids. You just lost track of time and you were late. But if you have kids of a certain age, you can just say, oh, you know what? Oh, the kids were crazy. And we'll all be very sympathetic to that. We can all imagine you're trying to get out of the house and the kids are screaming. So we're not going to push back on that. And you get to save a little bit of face on being late. There's really not even a lot to gain or to lose. But that sounds pretty pretty normal, doesn't it? Like, that's the kind of thing that you maybe have even heard yourself do or say things like that. It's not really truth and integrity. Just own it. Hey, I was late. Here's where we might really be able to stand alone in truth and integrity, is maybe even less with ourselves and more about when we're talking about other people. I've mentioned that over the years, for various reasons, I've worked a lot of entry-level, kind of low-end jobs, the kinds of things where there's a lot of turnover. And if you stay at a job for any length of time, you see a lot of people come in and probably go. But you meet a lot of people and new people, and an obvious thing to talk about when somebody's new at the job is your job. What was your last job? What happened? Oh yeah, why are you here now? And so I would hear a lot of stories about what happened at somebody's last job. And I'll tell you that if you're talking to me, my immediate natural bias is always toward trust and belief. If you tell me something and I don't have any reason to question it, I am probably not going to question it. And so at first, I never really questioned anything. But the stories would always kind of revolve around, well, my supervisor was terrible, and so, it was all his fault, and things just didn't work out. And the first time I would hear that, I would think, I know that happens sometimes. That sounds really unfortunate. But after I kept hearing that, the kind of statistical part of my mind thought, this seems very, very statistically unlikely that every person who I'm talking to is the innocent victim, and every person who is not here is the terrible perpetrator. At some point, that's going to be a little bit unlikely. And so it was boring jobs, okay? So I started asking questions sometimes, just follow-up questions, not any, just really honestly kind of trying to have fun. I wasn't trying to call anybody on anything, I don't care. But the stories would go something like this. Here was a very common variation was, well, my supervisor was threatened that I knew how to do the job better than he did, honestly, and so he didn't like that and he got rid of me. I think, supervisors generally want employees. That's how the work gets done. And so I say, wow, that's crazy, man. I mean, you'd think that most supervisors would love to have a good and knowledgeable and talented employee like that. And then the truth would start to come out. They'd say something like this. They'd be like, well, I am the kind of person who, I'll tell someone what I think. I don't hide what I believe. And so I told him once or twice, kind of what I thought about him and the way he did things. And then I'm just having fun. So I just say, oh, you didn't tell him kindly, did you? And he'd say, well, I mean, there was a bit about his IQ relative to a houseplant. And I mean, I did say something about his wife's sexual habits. I probably could have left that part out. And so then I wouldn't say this because I wouldn't have to. It'd be like, okay. So you didn't get fired because your supervisor was terrible. You got fired because you were terrible. I can understand why you left that bit out, but it does make your story a little bit more believable. Now again, does this kind of thing feel kind of familiar? Does this seem like the sort of story that maybe you've heard a whole bunch of times? Does it seem like the kind of thing that maybe you've even been a part of on a kind of normal basis, right? Maybe it isn't your boss, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's the person at the store, the stranger that you had some random altercation with, and you talk about everything that they did that was wrong, but you just kind of skip over the parts where you maybe instigated or provoked or escalated the whole situation. And so here's my contention is, let's use truth and integrity in such a way, let's talk about events and other people in such a way that if the other was there listening, they would agree with whatever was said and would not even feel necessary to add their side because their side was honestly and fairly represented. Oh, that eagle just might be flying alone. Right? When you talk about that time your spouse was so annoying and then they're not going to have to come back later after someone mentioned something and say, okay, well, now here's the part that they left out, right? Because you had more interest in truth and integrity than you did making yourself look good and making the other person look bad. Now we've really done something. We're here in the middle of an election ramp up. Maybe you've noticed. If you haven't, God bless you. Do you ever see an attack ad and think, they really want to throw puppies in the river? But that's their plan, is to take money from my children? That's a terrible plan. My children don't even have any money. But wouldn't it be refreshing if somebody actually prioritized truth and fairness? And I'm not holding my breath for any major political party to hold truth and honesty as a value over potential political gain, but we don't have to follow their lead. We can follow Jesus. I don't even know, be gentle on this, because we want to be kind and loving to the people around us, but what if there's somebody who's talking to you about the person, the candidate that they really hate? And you maybe kind of gently and graciously insisted on them being treated with truth and with honesty and with fairness. Oh, listen, I don't know, maybe this is a pipe dream, but let's just say that 200 years from now, politics is done in a very, very different way from how it is today. And people are looking back on 2024 and how totally normal lies and half-truths and intentional misrepresentations and manipulations were, would you want to be seen, and would you want to be like, you know what, I lived in that time and I was definitely a part of that system? Or would you like to be able to say or to think, well, you know what, I was there, I lived through that, but I kind of stood alone. And I really did work for honesty and truth and fairness, even especially with the ones I disagreed with. Let's do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing, even when it means standing alone, even when it means costing us something. Let's go our own way when that's what it means. Let's swim against the stream of lies and manipulations, leaving out the other part of the story. Let's fight against the powers that be if the powers that be have to do with fudging the facts for your own benefit. Let's fly that eagle alone in truth and integrity. Listen, truth is not always going to be the easy thing or even the expedient thing. It will always be, you know this, the right thing. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you so much. You give us an opportunity to reflect you and your goodness and your glory in the way that we talk about ourselves and others and the world around us. Still praying, if you're here and maybe you've never taken the step to connect with Jesus in the first place, maybe some of this sounds like something you wouldn't even really be that interested in because you've always been more interested in personal gain or how you look or whatever the situation is. Listen, it's a very simple situation. Every one of us, you know this. We have sin. There's things that were wrong. We did them anyway. We knew they were wrong. That sin, that destroys any relationship that we can have with a perfect and holy and just Creator God who is going to be the judge of everything in the world and you and me. And when we have violated justice against the holy God who created us, what can we possibly do to repay that? Of course, nothing. But that's why Jesus came and died and resurrected so that you could be forgiven for your sin. He takes your unrighteousness and your sinfulness. You take his righteousness and you become a forgiven, adopted child of God and his family forever. If that's you, just right where you sit, if you're here in person or if you're watching online, you can pray something like this. Say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so that I could be forgiven and adopted as a child in your family. Please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be and give me the life that you have for me. If you just prayed a prayer like that, it's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's that you put your faith in God and his grace comes to you through that, and you are a new spiritual creation in Christ Jesus. The next best thing you can do is you are not created to live that life by yourself. Let somebody know. You can go out to the point. That's just the corner in the lobby. Let the person there know. They'll take your information. We'll be able to follow up with you with some good, healthy next steps in following Jesus. If you're online, send us a message. It'll be the same. For those of us who we've been following Jesus, but as simple and as elementary and as everybody knows as all of this is, man, it's really difficult sometimes, isn't it? Especially when it's going to cost us something. Will you just commit right here, right now, between yourself and the Spirit of God, that we will live in full truth and full integrity? Let the chips fall where they may. Let other people do whatever it is that they're going to do. But we are going to follow and glorify our God in Jesus Christ by living as he has instructed and as he has exampled for us. That we will be people of true trust and integrity and truthfulness, that will be trustworthy, and that whether that stands out or whether the whole rest of the world follows along and makes it normal, that we follow Jesus rather than anybody or anything else. Father, thank you so much for everybody here who's come to seek you and to find you and to follow you into their next step. Will you, by your Spirit, give us the strength and the courage and the follow-through to say and do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing, even when it costs us something, for your glory. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.